Millions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
As a marked and desperate, bloody escalation of Putin's invasion grips Ukraine, costing countless lives and turning tensions up to boiling point, we'll get the latest on what's happening on the ground and how the world is responding. This is GB News with Alex Phillips. More threats of nuclear war and indiscriminate and inhumane bombardment of civilians. As Putin escalates his brutal attack, can Ukrainian resistance hold on? Ukrainian President Zelensky again appeals for immediate EU membership in a plight for continental solidarity. Will it be granted? And is it right or plausible? And amidst heartbreaking and horrifying headlines of the war in Ukraine are stories of human courage and kindness. We speak to those doing their bit to try to help. That's our coverage for the next hour. As always, you can contribute by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk and follow our updates on Twitter @gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister has told the Commons Russia's actions in Ukraine fully qualify as a war crime. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, who was watching proceedings, was welcomed with a standing ovation. Boris Johnson praised the country and its citizens for their resolve. He announced the government is going to match up to £20 million in public donations to the Disaster Emergency Committee's Ukraine appeal. He also said he told President Volodymyr Zelensky that the UK will do everything it can to accelerate the delivery of weapons.
Putin has gravely miscalculated. In his abhorrent assault on a sovereign nation, he has underestimated the extraordinary fortitude of the Ukrainian people and the unity and resolve of the free world in standing up to his barbarism. The UN General Assembly will vote later today, and we call on every nation to join us in condemning Russia and demanding that Putin turn his tanks around.
In Ukraine, the State Emergency Service says more than 2,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. Hundreds of structures, transport facilities, for example, hospitals, kindergartens and also homes have been destroyed. The mayor of Kharkiv says the city is regularly being hit by rocket and airstrikes. This morning, President Volodymyr Zelensky said resistance has been strong and Russia too has suffered heavy losses.
Just think about this figure. Almost 6,000 Russians died, Russian servicemen, within 6 days of war. A figure without enemies' losses during the past night. 6,000. To receive what? To receive Ukraine? It is impossible. It will not happen with rockets. It will not happen with bombs, tanks, any strikes. We are on our land, and there will be an international tribunal to prosecute them for the war against us.
Thousands of Ukrainians have said they'll stay and fight to defend their country, including the MP, Kira Rudik.
We have enough of stuff, and we are getting more and more supplies to be able to survive the siege. We understand that Putin has nothing that could stop him except for the bravery of Ukrainian people and the support of our international partners.
Ukrainians say Russian troops are deliberately destroying residential areas.
Many people in Ukraine, they are strong, they are not frightened, and they are ready to fight till the end, till the last drop of blood, if it will be needed.
And yesterday, Russia continued shelling the residential area, so deliberately destroying the houses, and they did it throughout the day and in the night as well. So people were not able to go out and were hiding in the shelters and the basements.
The humanitarian crisis is clearly growing. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 874,000 people have fled to Ukraine to neighbouring countries since the conflict began. Most of them are in Poland, which has taken in almost 500,000 refugees. The owner of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which runs between Russia and Germany, has sacked all of its staff following US sanctions. The company, which is based in Switzerland, says it hasn't filed for bankruptcy yet, but sources, according to the Reuters news agency, suggest it could happen as soon as this week. Germany refused to grant the pipeline final approval after the Russian incursion. Now, in other news now, a 15-year-old girl has been seriously injured in a shooting at a bus stop in Liverpool. Merseyside police responded to reports of gunfire in Toxteth just after 5 p.m. yesterday afternoon. The girl was taken to hospital and is in a stable condition. Police say it is a miracle that she survived. A 21-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder.
Actions of those people responsible for this attack on a 15-year-old schoolgirl who is waiting in a bus stop to go home from school are utterly appalling and shocking, even with 29 years service. It shows a total disregard and contempt that they have for the decent, honest, law-abiding people who live, work and visit this city.
In Australia, tens of thousands of people have fled their homes following warnings of extreme weather. 14 people have died since the worst floods on record hit both Queensland and New South Wales. Brisbane received 80% of its average annual rainfall in just a few days. Sydney's now bracing for torrential rain and flash floods. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you any developments as it happens. Now, let's head to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Ukraine is under fierce bombardment as Russia ups the ante 1 week after invading. There are reports of countless civilian casualties as paratroopers attack cities, and an ominous convoy of troops continues to loom towards Kiev. Meanwhile, fighting surrounds Europe's biggest nuclear power plant, posing a risk to the entire continent, while Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has warned again of a catastrophic Third World War involving nuclear weapons if NATO gets involved. As Putin doubles down, leaving Europe on tenterhooks as to what he could do next, many fear the only solution now is mutiny or his own advisors turning against him. While information suppression and propaganda ravages Russia, with polls suggesting a staggering 2/3 of the population still trust and support Putin, this is a war being fought on multiple fronts, and one that must be stopped before it threatens the whole world. The question is how, and at what cost? We can hear now from political reporter for the Kiev Independent, Oleg Sukhov, who is currently in Romania. Oleg, what is the latest that you're hearing from inside your country?
Hello. Well, the general outline is that Russia has escalated the war against Ukraine because it failed to achieve a quick victory, a blitzkrieg, because it hoped to defeat Ukraine in the first several days. But now it faces a very long war a very difficult war, and it decided to carpet bomb Ukrainian cities. It decided to destroy a lot of civilians. And I think the Russian military leadership believes that that way it will be easier for them to seize large cities. So Putin has essentially become an international terrorist, and you know, it's hard to avoid parallels with Adolf Hitler. I think now the only way for the international community to deal with Putin is a new Nuremberg trial over Putin and his accomplices. That's the general outline.
Yeah, there have been reports of now totaling possibly around 1,000 civilian casualties, with tens of thousands more trapped underground, with threats that Russia might deploy siege tactics on cities, essentially strangulating them from supplies, starving the population to death, while others are calling for humanitarian passages to be set up for people who are unable to now flee. How long do you think Ukrainian citizens who haven't yet left the country, how long do you think they can hold out?
Well, it depends on specific cities. As far as I understand, Mariupol in Donetsk region is surrounded by Russian troops, and Kharkiv may face very hard siege. And Kharkiv has been carpet bombed, and the center of Kharkiv, some areas in the center of Kharkiv have been destroyed. In general, Ukraine can hold out for a long time. It's just the question is the cost. So the costs may be devastating. Like eventually, like it can be many thousands and even millions of people, unless Putin is stopped. And the only way to stop him is to essentially destroy the Russian economy. And I think a very good option for the West would be to declare a no-flight zone over Ukraine. Putin is trying to intimidate the West, by basically resorting to nuclear blackmail. But I think he's not an idiot. He understands that he will be destroyed if he declares a nuclear war. So I think the West should not be scared of a nuclear war, because it's a very unlikely scenario. So if there is a conflict with Russia, it's likely to be conventional. So the West should increase its military supplies, weapons supplies to Ukraine. And I know that several European countries recently refused to send fighter jets to Ukraine because they are afraid of conflict with Putin. I think the West should be more brave than that. It's just unless Putin is stopped now, I think Poland and other Eastern European countries will be threatened. I cannot rule out that Putin will try to invade, Poland, Hungary, or Romania, the Baltic states, in a conventional way. It will not be a nuclear war. So basically, he's trying to destroy the whole international security system. And if Ukraine is defeated, if the West allows Ukraine to be defeated, it will be the end of NATO and the end of the current international security system.
Oleg, thank you so much for joining my programme. There's Oleg Sukhov there. Well, I'm joined now by the military historian and defence analyst Chris Newton. Chris, I mean, just speaking to Oleg there, he has reinforced this opinion that some people hold that the West should commit to a no-fly zone, and believes that Putin actually has an appetite to threaten other countries. We've seen pictures of the Belarusian president standing in front of a map suggesting that Moldova could be a next target. But Oleg Sukhov there saying that he believes Russia would use conventional tactics, tanks and bombs, and we shouldn't be afraid of nuclear conflict. And in fact, this is just blackmail from Putin. What's your interpretation of that?
Hello, Alex. It's good to be here. He could be right. He could be right, but I have to look at the evidence, and the evidence is that Russia has used Novichok and plutonium on the streets of Britain before. They have made various nuclear threats before. They have a doctrine. The Russians have a doctrine, an escalate to de-escalate doctrine, a first strike nuclear doctrine, which could potentially allow for the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And if you look at what someone like Fiona Hill, the British American, former American official for the State Department, she says that we have to take these threats very seriously. So I'm afraid I really do understand the arguments that were just made, but that's a massive risk to assume that Putin wouldn't use nuclear weapons, given that so many analysts have said that Putin wouldn't invade Ukraine, would he? So we have to be very careful there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me as well that, we must have some sort of intelligence that calls into question Putin's determination and his mental state. Otherwise, it seems to me we probably would be committing more to the fray. But what about this threat to other parts of Europe? Like I said, we've seen Lukashenko standing in front of a map that purportedly seems to show that Moldova is part of a strategy for invasion. You had Oleg Sukhov there saying that the threat could easily extend to other former USSR satellite states. Do you think that is in Putin's design, or is he prepared to stop, say, at Russia, Belarus and Ukraine and create, this imagined new country, super country of Eurasia?
That's certainly his vision. His vision is to create sort of a new Russian empire, which is very much modelled on the old Russian empires. His vision is to certainly to bring Ukraine in, and that would also bring in, if you take for example the wars of Peter the Great, the Baltics as well. So certainly he has a desire to do that. What we could do is to boost deterrence in the NATO countries, in the Baltics, and hopefully that will deter him from attacking the other countries which are part of NATO. Remember, he is invading Ukraine. He's not invading the Baltics, which probably would have been an easier operation. So he's going for Ukraine because obviously Ukraine's not part of NATO. So there could be a degree of deterrence there, but then again, I could be wrong. He could go for the Baltics next. But the best we can do is to boost deterrence, is to increase our defence spending, and to put more troops in the Baltics, Poland, and the other countries as well.
Chris Newton, thank you ever so much. Chris is a military historian. Now, as brutal attack continues on the ground, there is also an information war at play, with leaders either harnessing social media or blocking it in a pursuit of their goals. But how much of a risk does escalating online rhetoric pose, and what sort of disinformation is circulating? Well, let's talk to the Russian-British social commentator and podcaster, Konstantin Kisin. Konstantin, you have been quite vocal on Twitter about this and the amount of things flurrying around, people throwing in their two-bit with opinions on everything from no-fly zones to sanctions, and are worried about how this information being fed into the bigger system could potentially pose a huge risk.
Well, you've just heard quite a bit of it on your own program, Alex. Now, you know that for me, this is very personal. I have family in almost every part of Ukraine who are sheltering, some friends who are fleeing the region, etc. But some of the rhetoric that we are hearing now, I understand why Ukrainian journalists like the one you had on earlier would be calling for a no-fly zone, for example. But the idea that the West is going to start shooting down Russian planes, which is what a no-fly zone would involve, is asinine. It is insanity. Look, this conflict is only going to get resolved in one of three ways, either with a complete annihilation of Ukraine, or with the complete annihilation of the world, or it's going to end at the negotiating table. And what we have to do is get this to a position by supporting the Ukrainians, which we are doing very well, to fight for themselves, to secure and protect their country, and get Putin to a point where he's willing to negotiate. And at that point, everybody is going to need to be seen to have won this, because as you mentioned earlier in the program, Alex, 2/3 of Russian people support this. And the reason for that is very obvious. For the last several weeks, Russian state media, I'm not talking about the sort of stuff that you might see here in the West, like Russia Today or Sputnik or whatever. I'm talking about Russian state media in Russia has been telling their people a very different story. They're being told that there's a genocide of Russians happening in eastern Ukraine. They're being told that NATO and Ukraine are planning to invade Russia, or at least those two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine and so on. So Vladimir Putin is going to need to seem to have got some kind of win. And obviously the Ukrainian position is becoming more intractable as well, as they're able to stand up for themselves. So there are ways out of this, and I've suggested some of the ways forward, but they are going to be through negotiations, and we need to ratchet down this conversation about getting rid of Vladimir Putin, etc. I'm no fan of his or his policies whatsoever, but if you back him into a corner, this is a person who's got nuclear weapons, and as your historian guest said only a moment ago, Russia is not afraid to use them.
Yeah, I mean, the question there is who Vladimir Putin would listen to, because reportedly he has very few advisors surrounding him now. There has been some suggestion that people who could create an off-ramp, to use a US military term, could be people like President Xi of China, or perhaps the ex-German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who are two characters or two figures that people assume that Putin respects. Do you think that could be the way forward, or are we looking at essentially a massive concession, offering a chunk of Ukraine at the very least on a plate to Putin, which some might consider appeasement?
No, I don't think what we need here is appeasement at all, and that's not what I'm suggesting. But we are going to have negotiations. What we need to get to is a position where Ukraine gives Russia things that Ukraine doesn't care about losing, and Russia gets to save face, and Ukraine gets to have long-term security. So the way to do that, in my opinion, is to allow Ukraine to accept that Crimea isn't coming back, to accept these two eastern regions, which are not exactly helpful to Ukraine anyway. There's nobody really in Ukraine that thinks they're salvageable, even after what happened in 2014. So if you give Russia that, they can save face, and they already have de facto control of those regions since 8 years ago. So it's not a big loss for Ukraine. And on the other hand, you are going to have some kind of Western protection, whether there's some kind of peacekeepers on that border that then forms. That's the solution. This is not about appeasement. We have to make it clear that Russia has to be seen internally, domestically, for their own people to have won, for them to have protected ethnic Russians and all of this other stuff. But from our position, we have to make it very clear that there's going to be things there in place for the long term, so that this can never happen again. Because as you know, I've mentioned previously that one of the reasons this has happened is the West has taken its eye off the ball. And my concern is, if we don't put things in place now, the next time we have a disputed election in America, or we're busy, dividing ourselves over some other culture war nonsense, then we will end up in a position where Putin is keen to expand further. So that's why you have to have a very strong negotiated settlement here that allows him to walk away with this, with saving face. But also, I think he's been shocked, and a lot of people in Russia have been shocked by the strength of the international response, and I think will act as a deterrent going forward.
Konstantin, thank you so much. It's been illuminating, fascinating having your pragmatic contribution to this. It really has been. Thank you so much. Well, I'm also joined in the studio by Benedict Spence, who's a foreign affairs commentator and journalist. Now, very briefly, Benedict, I mean, listening to all of that, everyone's trying to figure out what the escape route is, what the off-ramp is. Putin can't be seen to climb down, but we essentially need him to do that, or somebody to take him out.
We need him to be able to climb down. I think a lot of what Konstantin's suggestions over Crimea, Donbass, these are reasonable. But of course, there will be a lot of concern in Ukraine, because that'll have echoes of Czechoslovakia, where the Sudetenland was essentially ceded to Germany on the basis that Germany wouldn't go any further. And then, of course, Germany just carried on. If you give those parts to Ukraine and then you don't reinforce the Ukrainian military, and you don't reinforce neighboring countries like Moldova, like the Baltics, actually then what is to stop the Russians later on, just rolling back into Kiev later on down the line. That's very important here, that whatever it is that ends up being ceded to Russia, if anything does get ceded, NATO cannot actually, be asleep at the wheel ever again. Unfortunately, this is going to mean, and a lot of people in the UK, France, Germany, and the United States are not going to like it. It's going to mean permanent states of alert. It's going to mean boots on the ground. It's going to mean aircraft squadrons. It's going to mean missiles. In these Baltic states, it means that Nordic states, like, for example, Sweden, who aren't members of NATO, need to be offered it, sort of at this moment in time, said, if you want it, it's here on the table. But as you've seen with Ukraine, you don't necessarily have time to mess about here. This could happen very quickly. Again, this is going to mean awkward conversations about the role of countries like Turkey, which has been at odds with its NATO allies in the past, but which is a very key part of NATO. It is going to need an awful lot of very delicate negotiations, because otherwise the alternative is a country like Russia, which, as has been said, it is prepared to use nuclear weapons. You don't spend that amount of money on developing high-tech missiles to aim and neutralize NATO's air superiority if you don't intend to use them.
Benedict, thank you. Well, for the past couple of years, we've all been armchair epidemiologists. Now it's your turn to become an armchair foreign affairs expert. You can, of course, email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or follow our updates on GB News on Twitter. You're with GB News on TV and radio. I'm back after a short break. And as President Volodymyr Zelensky again presses for Ukraine to join the EU, we'll ask why not. Time for a short break and a check on the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A damp and gloomy day for most of us as a band of rain moves north, bringing extensive low cloud and hill fog, but it stays mostly dry and bright for the far north of Scotland as the influence of high pressure gradually moves to the east. Here's the weather front, meanwhile, moving up from the south. Nothing particularly heavy associated with this. It's mostly light and moderate outbreaks of rain pushing into central and southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England by the afternoon, and remaining generally gloomy and damp across the rest of England, much of Wales as well. Something a little drier and brighter for the east and southeast of England, and it's mild in the southwest, 11 to 13 Celsius, but it's also mild in the north of Scotland, where we keep the sunshine through the afternoon, and 10 or 11 Celsius possible here. But the rain pushes into the north of the mainland by the evening. It's a windy evening for many, especially western Scotland, with the risk of gales in exposed spots. The rain arrives into Orkney, but Shetland stays clear overnight. And for much of the UK, with the extensive low cloud and those outbreaks of rain continuing, it is a mild night, a frost-free start to Thursday, but a damp and gloomy start once again. This time, some heavier and more persistent rainfall pushes into western Scotland, western England and Wales, moving slowly into central parts by the afternoon. Meanwhile, it's a much brighter day for East Anglia in the southeast. Sunshine here, 11 to 13 degrees, and it does brighten up across Northern Ireland, West Wales, southwest England by the afternoon as well. Most places seeing highs of 9 to 12 degrees. The band of rain slowly moves east during Thursday night, and it's really going to stall across eastern parts of the UK on Friday whilst brighter weather arrives into the west. Gradually, the weekend does turn drier and a little brighter. There'll be some sunshine around with highs of 8 or 9 Celsius.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News with me, Alex Phillips, but now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's coming up to 2:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the Prime Minister has told the Commons Russia's actions in Ukraine fully qualify as a war crime. Ahead of Prime Minister's questions, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, who was watching proceedings, was welcomed with a standing ovation. Boris Johnson praised Ukraine and its citizens for their resolve. He also said that he'd told their President Volodymyr Zelensky that the UK will do everything it can to accelerate the delivery of weapons.
Mr. Speaker, with the continued heroism and resolve of the Ukrainian people, which is so amazing that we've seen over the last few days, and with the unity of the West that we are seeing, which I think has also taken aback President Putin, I've no doubt at all, Mr. Speaker, that he will fail and that we will succeed in protecting Ukraine.
Kill Paris! In Ukraine, the State Emergency Service says more than 2,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. Hundreds of structures, including transport facilities, hospitals, kindergartens and homes, have been destroyed. The UN's refugee agency says more than 874,000 people have fled from Ukraine to neighbouring countries since the conflict began. Most of them have gone to Poland, which has taken in almost 500,000 refugees. Companies have also been taking action against Russia. The US airplane manufacturer Boeing has suspended parts and maintenance for the country's airlines. Google has blocked mobile apps connected to the news channels RT and Sputnik. Apple has halted the sale of its products and restricted its map services. Ford has also interrupted operations. You're up to date now here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now, back to Alex for more of We Need to Talk About.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has again made a direct appeal to the European Union to expedite his country's membership in a bid to shore up continental solidarity in the face of extreme Russian aggression. But is this even plausible? And is it the best way to proceed? Well, Maria Adviva is a research director at the European Expert Association, and she is currently in Kharkiv, which has been under heavy bombardments from Russian troops. She joins me now. Maria, first of all, tell me what it's like in Kharkiv. How are you? What's been going on?
Hello, I have the chance today to go outside when there was some period with no bombardments in the city center. So I wanted to, to make as much videos as possible of the war crimes that Putin now does in Ukraine to show the world what's going on here. And the building which you now see, it's the building of the Kharkiv National University Economic Faculty was situated there, and the nearby buildings are destroyed as well. So I have seen that people were coming with their luggage to the railway station by foot because it's no transportation, and they apparently were trying to get out of the city using the railway because it is still functioning, and there are emergency trains which can take people to the western part of Ukraine. The bombardments continued then throughout the day, and I have seen the air fighters that bombarded again the central area of Kharkiv, which means they are destroying historical buildings and buildings where actually people live. This is a residential area downtown where is no military infrastructure, and also they are targeting the critical infrastructure in Kharkiv, trying to leave the city without electricity and heating. And I myself do not have already so since noon electricity in my apartment, so I am just using now what was left from the charged the laptop, and then there will be no still there is some internet connection, but well, they probably will also try to target these as well. So what it looks like the act of genocide against Ukrainian people, and Putin and his troops are taking the city as hostages and trying to blockade the city, so there will be no possibility for the residents here to get any necessities, any food. There are big lines in front of the supermarkets which are still operating, which are opened, which were a few actually, and just to get inside. And it means that if you even stand for 2 or 3 hours outside waiting for your turn to get into, probably there will be nothing left there. So the city is actually already in the humanitarian crisis, and that means that immediately there should be actions made on the supplies of humanitarian aid to the city, and making some kind of green corridor for people in Kharkiv that would like to get out, because I have my friends who now are already thinking about leaving the city because of this targeted bombardment on residential areas, because they do not want their children to die under Russian bombs, but they cannot go out because the bombardments and the air fighters, they go all around the city, and you don't know where they will strike next.
Maria, thank you so much for joining us. And I mean, the harrowing images we're seeing there is matching very much your pretty bleak commentary. Please stay safe and join us again on the show in future. We really are. Our thoughts and our prayers are with you and your safety. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Now, after the break, we'll hear from the British man who travelled to Ukraine to find his wife and child. See you shortly.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Desperate attempts to call a ceasefire this evening continue as Russia claims to have seized more territory in Ukraine. However, reports from Ukrainian defense forces say that Putin's troops are being pushed back in critical areas. Meanwhile, reports of under-resourced Russian soldiers lacking food and vital supplies is allegedly seeing cases of very quick surrenders and abandonment of vital equipment, raising faint hopes of a possible mutiny stopping Putin's furious attack. Here in the UK, Boris Johnson has agreed on the need for sanctions to go further to exert more pressure on President Putin in the coming days. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joins me now. Mark, can you bring us up to speed with the latest?
Well, yeah, the very latest from the Ukrainian government is that now 2,000 civilians have been killed in the fighting over recent days. So that ceasefire is so badly needed. Live shots over the capital, Kiev, show it relatively calm at the moment, but the air raid sirens have been going off a number of times throughout the day, and there have been the sounds of gunfire and explosion on the outer suburbs of the Ukrainian capital. But elsewhere in the country, that's where there are real pockets of serious fighting. We're looking at a map now for our radio viewers. I just want to explain that this is a map showing effectively the northeast and the eastern and the southern parts of Ukraine. So for those radio listeners, the cities that we're highlighting are Kharkiv up in the northeast, Mariupol, which is down on the Black Sea, that important port for Ukraine, and then Kherson, which is just north of Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula, of course, that was annexed by Russia in 2014. And it looks, when you look at the map there, that Vladimir Putin is trying to cut off the Ukraine from the east, the northeast, and the south of the country there, to effectively cut Ukraine off completely from the Black Sea if he moves further west than he is at the moment. Those cities, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and Kherson, have been surrounded. This being confirmed by the UK Ministry of Defence. Reports that Kherson had actually fallen, that there were Russian troops in control of that southern city, but the Ukrainian authorities say that is not the case, but it is surrounded by Russian forces. And this would really fall into the sort of game plan of what Russia has done in the past. We can show you another map, which is a map pushing in on the capital, Kiev, and you can see the Russian troops to the north of Kiev pushing down with a view, it seems, to surrounding Kiev like they have done with these other cities. The game plan, as so often exercised by Russian forces in the past, is to surround these large urban areas, cut them off, bombard strategic areas of the city, but of course that will often result in those in residential areas being caught up in this as well. And then force some kind of capitulation, some kind of surrender from the inhabitants of these centres of population. We want to show you some images from Kharkiv, which again, for our radio listeners, I can describe as just buildings in the city centre reduced to flaming wreckage, with missile strikes at the university, the main national university in Kharkiv, and the police headquarters, which is just across the street. In addition to that, there are residential areas of Ukraine's second largest city, which have been absolutely obliterated by very sustained rocket and artillery attack. Overnight, we saw very significant rocket barrages, it seems, and again today that is continuing. Paratroopers landed in the city as well, with a view, it seems, to try and take the city or perhaps surround it. They were pushed back by those Ukrainian defenders within Kharkiv. And as I say, it is a similar situation that has been unfolding down in Kherson, with Russian troops seen on the ground there, verified images that we now have of those Russian troops moving about. They don't look as though they have full control of the city. They are very gingerly sort of moving across the streets, taking cover behind buildings and also behind trees and the like. So that would seem to tally with what the Ukrainian authorities suggest, which is that Russian forces are not in control of the city, but they are indeed in the city. And talking of the bombardment, the missiles, the artillery attacks, the city of Zhytomyr, which is west of Kiev, was absolutely levelled. A residential area near a near base, levelled by missile attacks overnight. The pictures that have now emerged showing hardly a house standing, significant casualties. They put the figures initially at just 4, but it's more than that. I mean, we're hearing, as I said, just at the start there, of 2,000 people now already killed across Ukraine. And that is pushing people in ever greater numbers towards the border of friendlier countries across the Ukrainian border. 875,000 people have fled just in the last few days. So pushing up close to 1 million already. 450 of those have gone to Poland, 100,000 at least crossed the border into Romania. And the United Nations is estimating that about 4 million could cross the border in the days and weeks ahead, potentially more. Of course, Ukraine is a decent-sized country, 40+ million people, 7 million internally displaced in the country, fleeing the worst of the fighting, and many of them may well end up heading to the borders of friendlier nations to try to seek refuge, to try to get away from the Russian forces' relentless bombardment.
Mark, thank you very much. Very distressing updates there. That's Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. Well, as war wages 2,000 miles away, for some people this is a conflict very close to home. Ian Umney from St Helens in Merseyside has travelled to Ukraine to track down his wife and child. Ian, how are you? Please tell me of your situation.
I'm good, and my family are good as well. We are currently in the southeast of Ukraine, and Russian troops are advancing quicker than I expected. Having seen your security roundup just there, I wasn't very impressed. They are now approaching to be just over the river, so my need to get my family out is becoming more and more urgent.
I mean, do you have any sort of concrete plans which you're trying to follow to do that? Or is this a case of following updates and just trying to do anything you can amidst the chaos?
So the next available evacuation train, we're going to be on it. Failing that, if they come before then I think we will send my family to a safe place outside of the city, and I will stay here and defend, because I can't outrun a motored vehicle. So there's two options: either get the next available train out of here or stay and fight.
I mean, Ian, it's impossible for, I think, any of us to empathise with what it is that you are going through. I mean, can you begin to even explain the emotions that you're experiencing?
Right now, anger, frustration, worry, upset. I'm concerned for my family right now.
I can imagine. I mean, it's. Do you feel you're getting enough support back at home as well? Have you got contacts in the UK who you feel are going to be there to assist you in what is a critical evacuation mission for your family?
Absolutely. I've had the utmost love and support from both people in Ukraine, Ukrainians themselves, people online on following my social media, and my family and friends. So we've had an outpour of support and offers of places to stay, and even paid flights to go and stay at someone's house in Greece. So the support is definitely there. It's just now it's down to me to get my family out. I'm the only support that my family has here to get them out. So, yeah.
Ian, I mean, it's a privilege to have had you on the programme today, and you must understand that every single person listening to your story is sending you all the prayers in the world, all the hopes and best wishes. So, I mean, our thoughts are with you, and please do stay in touch. That's Ian Umney there.
Thank you very much.
Desperately trying to get his wife and child out of Ukraine. Let's really hope that he manages to do that. Benedict, I mean, it's when you hear stories like that it really brings it home, of the humanitarian crisis looming and how people now, as Russia closes in, are really going to struggle to get to safety.
Yes, and I think there's approximately 600,000 people are known to have crossed the borders with EU neighbours and into Moldova, and you can imagine that there will be more. I mean, 600,000 in a week is a lot of people, and it's a country of 40 million. There will be a lot more, and it's going to create. It really will be not unprecedented, because of course Europe has seen refugee waves before, but it's going to be a substantial amount that the nations of Europe, the UK and its EU partners are going to have to find a solution to. And I don't think it's, we've had some criticism of the British government. I understand it's probably, not at the top of the priorities because they're not quite at the borders yet in the numbers that they are in Poland or Slovakia, but it is going to have to be a system where everybody takes their fair share, and that the utmost is done to get people out. This is sadly going to mean that, whatever the outcome is in Ukraine is going to end up being drained of the very people that it would need to rebuild it, and possibly even to fight long term. That is the choice that people are going to be making. And if the EU and the UK, that they have to sort of stand this up and say, if we do offer, open asylum to everybody, which we have to do, we need to be prepared for the fact that we are essentially ceding Ukraine. We will be creating societies within societies. There will be that many Ukrainian people. That shouldn't really be too much of an issue. They're culturally, they're very similar to people in Poland and Slovakia and the Czech Republic. It's not too different than to Germany and so on. The assimilation won't be too much of an issue. It'll simply be about the logistics, about making sure that there is the housing, the food, the medical supplies for all of these people, because it's going to be a decades-long process.
I mean, talking about things like food and medical supplies, we understand that there is a tactic with the invading Russian forces to use medieval siege techniques to cut off populations from vital supplies to keep them alive. One fears now that where we have been delivering defence weaponry to Ukraine, soon those flights are going to have to be of medicine, of food, of things just to support the people who have stayed behind.
Well, yes, and there's a terror tactic to it as well. Everybody knows. This is a part of the world that is well versed in the history of the Mongol invasions, and it's not too dissimilar to what the Mongols would do, which is to terrify the inhabitants and hope that they'd actually capitulate before you had to move in and slaughter them by surrounding them. But one of the things that the Russians will do and are doing is then, having threatened to encircle them, they then say, here is your refugee train, off you go. And of course people make for it, which then in turn slows down the possibility of Ukrainian reinforcements and aid coming in the other direction. It's a tactic that does work. It's used elsewhere, but it is something that the Russians are certainly doing. And it's very interesting that your guest just then said that actually, our briefings are not quite up to date, that there are troops here, and he wasn't expecting it. Well, again, that's how they move. They don't just go from city to city. They move very quickly, very fast towards certain key choke points and certain key urban areas and surround them. They don't have to fight for every street and every field and every village. It's not how it works. They move very quickly. That's the point. That's why you're seeing troops in Kiev right now, long before they've taken even all of Donbass. It's actually about getting to the key urban areas and cutting them off from the rest of the country and from international support before actually they can do anything about it.
Now, we really don't have much time left on the programme, so very briefly before we have to go, I want to circle back to Zelensky's appeal to expedite membership of the European Union. I mean, is that a wise move?
Oh, it's an incredibly complex and difficult issue. I mean, partly because actually what we haven't seen until too late in the day was a unified response from the EU. We're often told, aren't we, that one of the benefits of the EU is the fact that it is united and it can move very quickly, but it can't, as we saw, the massive difference in priorities between, say, Poland and Germany with regard to this crisis. And it turns out Poland, which was being, threatened with legal action by much of the rest of the EU, was right about its attitude towards the eastern border all along. What benefit does that actually do other than to sort of just provoke Russia even further? One interesting thing that you could do, which would help with the refugee situation, is offer EU citizenship without actually allowing Ukraine itself to join, which would mean that people wouldn't just have to stay in the first countries that they come to, that they would be free to move around the EU. It would make resettling a lot easier. There are sort of little tricks that you can get round the issue with. But right now, I'm afraid to say, the moment for accepting EU membership for Ukraine, NATO membership, that was on the table for 8 years. It's gone now. And actually, what we have to look to is what we're currently doing in terms of support for Ukraine, but actually reinforcing the countries around it that may very suddenly be thinking, we would quite like EU membership, we would quite like NATO membership, probably more important. We need to be expediting that process so that Ukraine, I'm afraid, is the last point and no return. This has to be the red line.
Benedict, thank you ever so much. Always a delight having you in the studio, even when the news is so horrific. That is pretty much all we have time for on today's show. A lot happening today. Again, of course, we've debated whether or not Ukraine would be wise to join the EU as Russian troops continue to put a stranglehold on the country, blocking off its borders and its access to the Black Sea. As Putin's indiscriminatory and inhumane bombing of Ukrainian citizens continue, sparking a mass exodus of refugees, leaching out over those borders into Poland and surrounding countries. The next question is, who next? And who can stop Vladimir Putin in his tracks? That's all I have time for today. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time from 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, of course, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey, so don't go anywhere. But first of all, it's time for a check on the weather forecast. But from me, have a very pleasant evening. Bye-bye.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A damp and gloomy day for most of us as a band of rain moves north, bringing extensive low cloud and hill fog, but it stays mostly dry and bright for the far north of Scotland as the influence of high pressure gradually moves to the east. Here's the weather front, meanwhile, moving up from the south. Nothing particularly heavy associated with this. It's mostly light and moderate outbreaks of rain pushing into central and southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England by the afternoon, and remaining generally gloomy and damp across the rest of England, much of Wales as well. Something a little drier and brighter for the east and southeast of England, and it's mild in the southwest, 11 to 13 Celsius, but it's also mild in the north of Scotland, where we keep the sunshine through the afternoon, and 10 or 11 Celsius possible here. But the rain pushes into the north of the mainland by the evening. It's a windy evening for many, especially western Scotland, with the risk of gales in exposed spots. The rain arrives into Orkney, but Shetland stays clear overnight. And for much of the UK, with the extensive low cloud and those outbreaks of rain continuing, it is a mild night, a frost-free start to Thursday, but a damp and gloomy start once again. This time, some heavier and more persistent rainfall pushes into western Scotland, western England and Wales, moving slowly into central parts by the afternoon. Meanwhile, it's a much brighter day for East Anglia in the southeast. Sunshine here, 11 to 13